right. Hello, Agnes. Thank you so much for joining me here on another episode of The Makeup Historian. I'm really excited to talk to you today because for once, an episode is actually about cosmetic history. I don't know how familiar you are with the show, but not every episode is about cosmetic history. It's more so research focused and an oral history podcast. But we had a chance to touch base a few months ago about a project that you were working on, which is why I asked you to be here on the show. So before we get started, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your academic background, where you're at school, and what you're focusing in on?
Yeah, of course. So I'm in my final year at the University of Toronto Scarborough location. I have been studying journalism for the past 4 years. And what really interested me in the whole cosmetic history assignment that we'd done together last semester was that I had just always in general had a very big interest in makeup, cosmetics, the whole industry, and I never really understood why it was so focused towards women. And so it was just agreed upon in society that this is something that women are, like we're expected to have knowledge and expected to be doing makeup, cosmetics, different things. So to me, it was more of a question that was in my head for a very long time, and I just needed to find out more. And I was given the opportunity to do this research project where I came across your podcast online, The Makeup Historian. So that was sort of a combination of both of the things that I was really interested in looking at for the assignment.
And I absolutely love that. I think that's such a fascinating component of cosmetic history. And one of the things, like, you had a chance to send me your final project, and I just absolutely loved seeing all the different ways that you attacked that central research question. So, I don't remember everyone's names. I remember seeing them in your presentation, but you interviewed some really interesting people to help you answer that question. So, do you mind telling us who you interviewed and why you chose them to, like, what did they bring to your project?
Of course. So I interviewed, her name was Sophia DeFulvis. She currently is working at an art gallery. She is at the OCAD, so that's the Ontario Community of Arts. And so her major is in visual arts, so painting and drawing, I think, is the name of her program. And so she has a great idea of historically how art manifests. So she just had a very good general knowledge of art in general, and specifically in ancient Egypt. So we were looking at how spiritually it was as much spiritual as it was for aesthetic purposes. So that was really important in ancient civilizations. That's sort of the origins of makeup and where it began. And I also wanted to take a sort of biological look at why maybe there's a scientific explanation as to why women are being sort of impacted more by the makeup and cosmetic industry. So I spoke to Shahab Eid. He is a PhD candidate in biology, and he has his degree in neuroscience as well. So there we sort of looked at sort of the nitty gritty, the hormones and the biology, and sort of how evolution has created this divide in between men and women, and why women have had more of a difficult time throughout history in becoming more independent. And we found some answers there as to why makeup has been something targeted towards women. And of course, I spoke to you, where we talked a lot about history, society, and how sort of in current day we're seeing a lot of changes as well in makeup. So we talked a little bit about how it's changing in times of COVID, and just in general throughout history, how it's been in society, specifically towards women.
Yeah. So after you had all your research completed, why do you think we should study cosmetic history? Because, I mean, you and I have a passion for this and we're interested in it, but in academia, in a very generalized sense, it isn't exactly something that you specialize in. Like, you don't, for like my field, You don't get a master's degree in history or a PhD in history with an emphasis in cosmetics. That isn't exactly a thing just yet. So, and that's something that I loved about your project so much, is I think it helps get us towards that ultimate goal of establishing cosmetic history as a true subfield. So, in your opinion, why do you think we should study it?
I think we should study it for the same reasons we study any field. It is a part of history, and it's literally physically ingrained in society, specifically for women. And I think we've come such a long way from, how women have been seen in history and sort of oppressed. And it's only very recent that we can put on a timeline of, okay, like where women entered the working field, and where in some countries women have just gotten the rights to drive or vote, things like that. So it's not, like it's not as much just a superficial thing like we're putting on makeup. It's actually something that we can look at on a historical timeline and see how things were developing in society at that time.
I love that. I love it. And this is something too. It complements a lot of things that I've talked to some other people about in the history field, is that I think, and something that I think your project was starting to really suggest as well, is that cosmetic history can be a lens to understand the more intimate aspects of everyday life, those things that we don't always uh, consciously preserve, or maybe don't want to preserve, that maybe we're trying to hide at the time. So I loved that you were looking at the topic like through a biological lens, anthropological, and because then it started to prompt those other discussions about like the hormones and fertility, and women's place within society, like socioeconomic status. It was fascinating, and I love that. So and in addition to, I think what we're living through and a part of like how we were able to find each other, I think the technological digital revolution, in addition, like kind of being coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, has amplified that phenomenon even more, of us really using this to understand those intimate aspects, and preserve those intimate aspects of everyday life in a better way than we have before. So in your opinion, how do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has influenced the cosmetic industry in general? Which I know is a very broad question, but what's your first take at that?
Okay, first and foremost, I think masks have been sort of one of the main factors that go into cosmetics. So
Mhm.
I know a whole group of women who just, you wear a mask, so you're actually masking your face, and that sort of, gives you a break from having to wear makeup, or so they feel this way, that you don't have to, or it gives you an excuse not to, which isn't ideal. It's not, we should never feel as though we have to cover our face without makeup. But that's just something that even I felt personally, and in Ontario and the GTA, at least we still have the mask mandate for at least another week. Personally, it's just weird for me to feel like I'm showing my face to public again when it's going to come off. But I feel for a lot of women it's going to stick. And like it was a super easy way, like if you want to just run out of the house, you're not wearing makeup, it's no big deal, no one can see your face. But for the actual sort of cosmetic industry, like there's been, first of all, a decline in lipstick sales. That's, no one can see your lips, no one's wearing lipstick. But there's
Yeah.
also been a significant increase in plastic surgery. So I'll reference a CBC article that I was just looking into. Um, there have been so many women who now have this opportunity. We're staying home, we're not going to work, or we're working from home, doing school from home. No one can see swelling if you get plastic surgery on your face, lip injections, or there was even the talk about Zoom. So as you're having Zoom calls with your workplace, your school, you're more focused on the little corner image of yourself than the actual focus of the meeting. And that's actually driven a lot of people to get Botox, like injectables, because they're seeing these wrinkles and they don't like it. And it's just this whole deal where plastic surgery has gone up, and there's also been a more focus on skincare, I'm noticing, than makeup. Um, it's just that we're going out less, we're not showing our entire face to the public, or we're working from home. There's no real need. Not that there ever should be, but there's less of a need to be wearing as much makeup.
Hmm. Well, two things. I can testify to the plastic surgery part that you were talking about. I haven't had plastic surgery, but I did have Botox for the first time during the pandemic, and even did like the cool sculpting, like on the chin, and the the lady who did the procedure, she was like, "Oh, well, you have the mask. It's okay. Like no one can see." And I'm like,
Right.
"That's so you're right on with that." And then you also mentioned something a moment ago where you were talking about how like there was almost this, I feel like, and I feel this too, it's kind of like now that society is starting to get back up and running, we almost feel a little bit like I don't want the world to see me without my makeup and like the mask. It was kind of guarding. But I think it's like those types of little nuances, I think that's what scholars need to kind of focus in on. Like, why do women feel that need? Why do they have anxiety with showing their real skin? And then also, like you said too, with the Zoom calls, that's a huge thing. And you're also right with that. Like people focus in on how they look. And then I can also add to that with like being on like doing a visual podcast or being a guest on a podcast, that was not something that I was used to before the pandemic. So it definitely did make me much more aware of like, how do I look? Am I being presented okay? And, take the time to fix little things. And then lastly, I'm curious about your input on this as a female scholar as well. This is something that I've noticed within academia, and I feel like this is probably something that women experience no matter what their field is, but especially with scholars being much more public, like kind of public figures, I'm noticing a phenomenon that well, it's not a new phenomenon, but it's just a little bit more in our face now. That when people disagree with something a woman says, the first thing they usually attack is her appearance to discredit her. And that, like, when you mentioned that about the kind of anxiety, that was what stood out to me because I've experienced that. When people don't like what I say, they kind of come at your appearance. So I'm curious if you have noticed that or if you've experienced that too.
Unfortunately, I have. It's I feel as though if you do show an interest in, let's just say anything, let's say cosmetics, but this can apply to fashion, to whatever it is that you're interested in, it sort of almost discredits it like, oh, how can you be, let's say you're in the sciences, how can you be so interested in biology and you're worried about your silly little makeup? Like that's a kind of, it's as though we can't have it both ways. Like they don't really correlate, but, or even like just, I don't know if this is even specific to women, but just having interests other than whatever your scholarly field is, it's almost, yeah, like you said, it discredits, and maybe it is maybe more specific to women, but yeah, like having interest in fields other than what you're studying might be a reason for someone to discredit you, whether or not they agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think it's important to bring awareness to that because I think it could deter other young women from continuing on in academia. It's nerve-wracking enough to do an interview, to be a guest for an interview, to do any type of research is nerve-wracking. And I've noticed that every level you go up, the number of women goes down. And I think that's one of the main contributing factors because, so many things in regards to your appearance we don't have control over. And then that's where I think there's that gravitation towards cosmetics. That is something you do have control over and you can have a little bit more agency with. So I think it's like it's a tool, but then it's also sad that it has to be used as a tool in academia for women. So and really, I mean, I just bring that up because I was thinking about our prior conversation and then the questions I sent you. And I don't necessarily have like the answer yet, but I do think it's important to document that this is something that women are feeling and that there is a connection to cosmetic history. Um, also in your final presentation, you talked a lot about how like digital technology was impacting the cosmetic industry. What were your findings with that?
Right. So we have access to the internet. We can see anything in seconds on our phones. So if we're looking at it, very biological sort of reproduction system here, back way before internet, back when we were just interacting with people that are within our general geographic communities, there isn't as much competition, let's say, between who's attracted to who and how you're going to end up with other people based on your appearance. But now you can see anybody and everybody online. And not only, besides the whole editing, and not only is it not always something real that you're seeing, it can be edited, it can be, people can lie about having plastic surgery. It's not really a concrete truth of what you're seeing online, but it's just the competition has grown to, from your little tiny community to the entire world that you're now able to see on your Instagram, on your Facebook, wherever you're using social media. But it's really hard to tell, again, like if what you're even seeing is true. So there's a lot of expectations for women to look a certain way, or you know you'll see perfect skin and you'll look at yourself and think, okay, well, I don't have skin like that, but that's not a real image that you're seeing. So that's another thing that's really sort of just adds to the pressure of people wanting to look a certain way.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's such an excellent explanation. And actually, not too long after we had our talk, I was the Kit magazine reached out to me and had some questions about like some new trends that I thought was interesting, because we talked like a lot about ancient cosmetic history as well. And in the grand scheme of things, there's definitely evidence that suggests red lipstick, black eyeliner, and then a painted white face have been predominant cosmetic trends, not in a variety of different countries, despite like changes in government or religion. But the editor for the beauty editor reached out and she had a question that I thought was very interesting. And I'm like, this is the perfect opportunity to ask you about this, because she wanted to know more about why the glowy skin trend was so attractive right now. Like, was it because of COVID? Is there biological things to it? So in our conversation, it was kind of similar to ours. Like we were working through those ideas and didn't, like, we could look at it through different lenses. So I thought I would throw it out to you, especially since you've continued with your research too. Like, why now? Why is the glowy skin so like such a big thing? And you also mentioned skincare too, that now there's a much more of an emphasis on skincare rather than like really dolling up. So what are your thoughts?
I'll say that healthy looking, glowing skin has always been something that everyone desires, of course, but it is true that recently we are seeing more emphasis on sort of glowy, like this dewy look rather than a super matte finish like we saw maybe, I don't know, 8, 10 years ago.
Mhm.
In my research personally, what I found is that a lot of what we do in our makeup is actually to subconsciously, we're not realizing as we're doing it, but some of the things that we do are actually showing, signs of fertility, like um, in women's cycles during different points of our cycles, we're seeing sometimes we have more progesterone in our levels. So, we look a certain way, we have more blush to our face, there's more blood flowing. So certain things do on a biological level make us look more fertile and hence more attractive. Maybe we don't really notice it. Like I don't see your cheeks and think, wow, you're so fertile. Like it's not something that we're noticing on an everyday level, but unconsciously, like if we really break down certain things and look at, a healthy woman, healthy skin, we think that is someone that you'd want to reproduce with because she's going to have healthy offspring and so on. So this whole less makeup, maybe more skincare focus is reflecting this reproductive ideas, but it's hard to say because it is such a personal choice for everyone, right? Like it's skincare, makeup, it's very much what you're comfortable with, what works for you. So, but in terms of trends, yeah, this is definitely something we're seeing. And I mean, they're always changing. So it's really hard to say, but this is a good reason why we should look into these things and get more sort of information.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think, and also, I think this is a good way, a unique and creative way to really help preserve women's voice. Because, like your whole project was mentioning, there really is that a big connection between women and cosmetics, and that's long standing. But I think this is a way that scholars from all different fields can help bring women's voice back into the textbooks, back into the classroom, and show the diversity of thought amongst women through cosmetic history. It's a kind of a unique way, but I think it actually really does help. And as I mentioned to you too, when we had a chance to talk, a project that I've been working on now for a few years, and then COVID really threw it off. But I've been trying to establish and build the Museum of Cosmetic History. So when I first talked to you, I was in the midst of trying to figure out debut exhibits. And I was curious what you thought would be like some good exhibits for the Museum of Cosmetic History, maybe not debut, or just ones that you would love to see in the future, you know, because you were looking at it through such a different lens than I was. And I want to make sure that it's not just, you know, that we have different ideas contributing to the exhibits.
Right. So something that I was personally very interested in my own research was what the industry is saying that women should be looking like what we're told is attractive. So many things I was noticing, like even from advertisements from the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was glowing hair and glowing skin and things like this. Like, and it does change. So, you know, at one point it was thin eyebrows, those were all the rage. Now it's thick eyebrows. So these industries are changing what women should be looking like throughout the year. So I think it'd be interesting to see sort of different examples, different advertisements on sort of like a historical timeline, like how women are supposed to be keeping up with decade by decade. Like it's just constantly changing, and it'd be really interesting to see how it's changing and what is being expected of women.
Mm.
And
Yeah. No, and that makes me think about something we that was in your final presentation. This relationship between a very intimate relationship between media and cosmetic trends, and how if it's, you know, if it's on TV, if it's on social media, just how much of an impact that really has on the industry, which then has an impact on women. For example, too, like you mentioned the eyebrow thing. As of late, it's been more natural, fuller eyebrows, and then the Pamela Anderson and you know thing came out on Hulu, and I think it was Hulu. And then there was a TikTok filter where it was like her makeup. And then now, within the past few weeks, there's been more and more people going back to the thin eyebrow look because, and it's like, it's so connected to media and the entertainment industry, digital technology. And I am like fascinated by how quickly that trend was implemented, because I don't want to date myself too much, but like I was, when I was working in the makeup industry, it was when YouTube and Instagram were just getting started. So these trends were not happening as fast. And that, to me as a historian, that's really kind of weird that just have one filter, one TV show, and then millions of people start changing something about their appearance. So those like, that's kind of where I think the conversation starts, and where I think different scholars can help. If like we attack it from different, you know, the interdisciplinary approach, then we can really start to understand those deeper like fears and anxieties or desires of a civilization that don't always make it to the textbooks. So
I will add to what you just said though about, you know, how media is really impacting the ways that women want to present themselves just based on what we're seeing on TV. Now for Gen Z, millennial, it's TikTok is all the rage, of course. And it's super interesting how, are you familiar with the show Euphoria from HBO?
Yes, I
Okay.
actually got caught
So,
up for once. I'm notoriously bad at being behind on shows.
right. So as that show becomes more popular, we're seeing these makeup looks that, are very specific to this show. It's like rhinestones on your eyes and these sort of very colorful, bright eyeshadow looks, which we haven't really seen prior to this show. So it's almost ever changing, and it's becoming impossible to keep up with these trends. And so it just, to me, like the most interesting thing would be seeing like a timeline of how things are progressing, and how we're keeping up, like how a few years ago it was the Kylie Jenner lip kits and matte lips and overline lips were all the rage, and now it's like a super soft glossy glow kind of look. So
Mhm.
it's really fun to experiment and try different things with makeup. It washes off, it's harmless, but well, sorry, it becomes more harmful when it's sort of permanent, like this rise in even like the cosmetic surgery that we talked about before. So it's really easy to go down that hole and want to look like what you're seeing online on TV and the media, but it's just not realistic with how quickly things are changing.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think there's such a fine line with cosmetics and then cosmetic surgery. And even going back to what we mentioned earlier, like I don't, I don't think I'm super old, but sometimes I feel old because of the pressure toward on women and academia. And it's funny, like I even catch myself sometimes being like, I don't need that. It's okay. Like I'm still, but you still have the pressure, and it's like it's just, I don't know. I wish there wasn't that pressure. And I think COVID in a weird way may have actually helped lift that, because I'm noticing, like, even with my things that I do, like, I'm like, I don't necessarily need that to prove that I am credible, or that, I can be taken seriously, because I just showed myself throughout the pandemic how I didn't need to get dolled up, and I still got all sorts of stuff done. And, I think it's just kind of lifting this veil and giving women a lot of agency back in the industry. And then something you were mentioning about like the show Euphoria too. I think it's really cool how like there's almost this mix of, we want those traditional trends that are kind of highlighting fertility, sexuality, but then there's also, it's simultaneously being mixed with these trends that really don't have anything to do with biology, fertility, sexuality. It's just because it's fun, and it's because that woman wants to wear that. You don't necessarily need graphic eyeliner and rhinestones to like attract a mate. You do it because you like it. And I think that's actually a pretty recent phenomenon in cosmetic history, where women are saying, I'm going to wear this specific trend because I want to, and not because I feel the need to reproduce. So I think there's kind of been like this change that has been prompted by the pandemic in a weird way. So I don't know if you feel the same way.
Something you mentioned about the whole age thing is that we're sort of getting younger and younger. Like we're seeing 12-year-olds looking 16, 16-year-olds looking 20, and it's sort of impacting girls at a far younger age than necessary. And I came across something like you should start getting preventative Botox when you're 20, and like that is far far too soon. Or you should start using eye cream before you even hit 20 to prevent any sort of signs of aging. And I just, like, if you think about it, it's a little bit ridiculous, but at the same time, like these are the things, this is why this was such an important question to me, is why are we being told that we need to fix ourselves in these sorts of ways, and where men are not like under this type of pressure. Like women's products even are so specific to, like even eye cream, you put it on this one little tiny place on your face. Meanwhile, men, we have like 5-in-1 products that just get the job done and they're fine. So
Yeah.
it's just this sort of, it's a lot of pressure, and it can be very overwhelming, especially if you don't really have a strong sense in what you want. If you're just sort of basing off of what you're seeing in the media, it can be super overwhelming, and especially for younger girls, it's damaging seeing these
Yeah.
images.
It can be really damaging. There's so much on women, and I remember something we talked about too, that historically speaking, the female body really has been perceived as communal property throughout different times in history, different nations. Um, and that's always really surprised me. And I think that's so, especially like for example, in America, it's like I think that's so deeply tied to the history of industrialization, urbanization, the rise of consumerism, and just like that relationship where unfortunately because of that there's been this underlying trend of viewing women as a commodity, and I think that's why there's so much of a, it's one of the ultimate blemishes I think of cosmetic history, but it's you kind of taking back that industry to reveal like the good and bad parts of women's history and not shy away from it for the sake of learning. But it's so like that's why I love this topic, because we get into all of these weird things by just having cosmetics be like this thread that connects all of these different civilizations and women and men who have lived before us. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know you're really busy, and I love that we were able to find each other and tag team and continue with the research. And if you ever like continue on with it, you are always welcome here. I would love to hear how your research is going and any new developments. So thank you very much.
Of course, thank you for sharing with me when I
Yeah.
had this big project last semester. Super
Of
helpful.
course. Yeah. I loved it. Thank you.